Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the MedTech Impact Podcast, where you get to hear from leaders and innovators who are shaping the future of medical technology. I'm Kyle Cruz.
And I'm Richard Meiklejohn.
And we're your hosts of the show.
So today we have Debbie Kantor, CEO and founder of Hero Medical Technologies. Welcome to the show, Debbie.
Thank you so much, Richard and Kyle. I'm excited to be here.
We're excited to have you back. So a bit of background, you were part of cohort 4 of Impact at the end of last year. And so we're super excited to see where you are today and see where you are going forward, of course. But as always, to kick things off, we like to set the scene and start with the problem. What is the big problem that Hero Medical Technologies is looking to solve?
We are focused on traumatic brain injury, or TBI, and our goal is really to expedite the diagnosis and treatment of head injury. And really the biggest problem is that 95% of patients are diagnosed with a mild form of it that still leads to lifelong complications. And so using data science, we discovered a way to detect secondary changes that cause some of the life-altering events.
And so when you're talking about these life-altering events, like what are some of those? Can you give a few examples?
Yeah, so starting from the point of injury, according to the CDC, traumatic brain injury can occur from a bump, jolt, hit to the head. They come in all shapes and sizes. Everybody's head injury is different, and it's not always the bleeding head injury that's the most severe. And so by analyzing massive data sets of head injury patients from the ambulance, we were able to see what the most critical biomarkers are to predict the patients who will fare worse, patients who will die before reaching the hospital, patients who will require hospitalization, patients whose oxygen will drop too low. And we even went on to predict which patients will suffer from the most pain, because 50% of head injury patients end up suffering chronic pain.
And I can imagine this is a huge market. I mean, people hit their heads all the time.
Yes. So according to research, infants and toddlers 0 to 4, and then older adults over age 65 are the ones most likely to suffer. 1 in 4 older adults will fall each year. But you then have a lot of people from motor vehicle accidents. And what we've identified is that there are a lot of people who should be either worked up, the medical lingo for being tested for a head injury, or just identified that they could be at risk of a head injury. And so you lose a lot of potential people who did hit their head, and therefore we believe that there's an underestimation of the true number of people with head injuries.
So Kyle, it seems like there's a huge unmet need.
Well, of course. I mean, I can tell you right now is I probably hit my head one too many times growing up with all the sports that I played. And, I'm just someone that likes to always put myself in some risky situations, if you will. So I can imagine that this type of technology and being able to kind of address and identify traumatic brain injury is so critically important. I'm just kind of curious. Can you tell us more too about just the current standard of care so far for addressing TBI?
Yeah, so standard of care, first off, if there's a bleeding head wound, then you would first, dress or bandage the bleeding wound. So that's step 1. Not every head injury bleeds. And so step 2 would be identify what their level of consciousness is. So the Glasgow Coma Score, or scale, GCS, is what's typically used to diagnose a patient before they get to the hospital, or even as they proceed through the hospital. So you'd identify, are they able to speak? Are they moving their arms and legs? Are they able to open their eyes or not? But then once they're at the hospital, they'll go through the whole process of being seen by a nurse, being seen by a doctor, and deciding, during the evaluation process, should they have a CAT scan or not? And that's really the gold standard of how it's identified if somebody has a brain injury or not. Is there an internal bleed inside the brain? Is there swelling? But the problem is that's a spot check. And so even checking the Glasgow Coma score, even checking vital signs, and then the CAT scan is not capturing some of the dynamic changes. And so even though it's known that blood pressure, a drop in blood pressure can be very meaningful, unlike heart patients who have, an EKG checked and have wires attached to them right away, for possible head injuries, they're not attached to all the monitoring equipment right away. And so a lot of that data is missed.
Well, that's a good point. And so I guess that leads us to our next question. I guess, how are you seeking to address this problem, and what is Hero Medical's kind of unique solution to improve the current approach?
Yeah, so just to give a bit of a background, I'm a nurse practitioner, so I'm looking at this very much through the eyes of a clinician. And so the unmet need, initially was for a cap-shaped bandage. And so I realized you need to first stop the bleeding if you're going to be able to capture the data. And so what began as a company to develop wound care products has evolved into a whole data science because of the fact that the more severely injured patients are not always the bleeding ones. So we came up with a system solution that's basically three-part, customizable, and works together. Put on a cap-shaped bandage so it takes a fraction of the time, then rolled regular gauze, and then integrate vital sign monitoring with red, yellow, green light indicators of how severe the patient is based on vital signs. And then incorporate it with a software mobile app that's basically making the decisions using not making the decisions, aiding the clinicians with decision support based on back-end data of other ones. So bandage, triage, and monitor the patient so that you can better identify which patients require the most intensive care.
And it sounds like you're doing it in a way that obviously allows faster time to treatment, to addressing potential TBI by combining, the way you described the way it's done today with the bandage, and then obviously then there being later steps in the process. You're doing it all in one. You've got the bandage, you've got the sensors or electrodes, right, that are going on the head, that are doing the diagnostic side, right? Is that fair?
Yeah, so what we're looking to diagnose is not the actual head injury. We're looking to diagnose the secondary complications of head injury that are markers for a more severe head injury. We're not replacing CAT scan. There's research out that shows that on average, head injury patients spend over 6.5 hours at the emergency room waiting to have all the testing, decision making. During that time, they might have their blood pressure and vital signs checked only, 3 to 5 times. And so a lot of that meaningful data is lost. So we're identifying those meaningful changes in vital signs that can help prognosticate, meaning understand what the future looks like for that patient and whether they should be admitted to the hospital, but maybe would otherwise be sent home because it's not realized that their injury is as severe as it is.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I guess, what are you seeing so far, from your product being used currently in clinicals or testing? What do those results look like?
Yeah, so because we are working on multiple stages, right? We have the bandage to develop the sensor and the software. We're running parallel development. So our bandage is about to be manufactured in the first small batch of 50 prototypes. We've already tested prototypes. The week that COVID shut everything down, we were able to eke in a simulation study at the Mayo Clinic, and we were able to prove that our bandage was faster than standard gauze every single time for nurses and surgeons who did this every day, wrapping their patients. So we had mock patients tested it, and the importance of that was that patients can bleed to death in 3 to 5 minutes. So the fact that we could shave off minutes of time with our bandage was a big value proposition. For the sensor itself, we're also in early development. To our knowledge, it's the first wearable sensor that can actually offer you the insights on the sensor, so you're not just reliant on the software. But this is still early. We're planning for an ER study to test that out. And then the back end data science, the most complex but very, very meaningful. We looked at 152,000 head injury patients from the ambulance, and we were able to test with 98.2% accuracy predicting low blood pressure. And that's very, very meaningful because that could double your risk of dying from head injury.
This is brilliant. Bringing true data intelligence to TBIs. It's such a vast improvement on the current standard of care. But you also mentioned there's a lot of ways you can take this. So I'm wondering, how have you decided where to focus in terms of those patients to get started? What's that beachhead look like?
Yeah, so our beachhead, through a lot of research, we realize now it needs to be the emergency room. Eventually, we want it to trickle to the ambulance as well, but there are commercialization, needs that we need to consider as a company. Is that there aren't reimbursement codes right now for an ambulance. You have 40,000 different fire departments purchasing from different organizations, and so to have it in the emergency room first, where you can model the importance of it, but translate the need from data from the ambulance can be very, very meaningful. We're trying to really create a connected platform. In fact, we just released an app that can be used for patients after they go home from the ambulance, from the emergency room, to monitor their pain after a head injury.
And is reimbursement established already? Like, what does that pathway look like going forward? Is there an existing code you can tap into?
Yes, so we had hired a consulting firm at one point to help us review codes, and we identified a number of codes for use in the emergency room. One of the problems is that you have patients that are sort of in no man's land, where it's undecided, should they stay at the emergency room, be admitted to the hospital, go home, or stay in observation. So we've identified some observation monitoring codes for use in the hospital, and then we're also able to tap into some of the reimbursement codes for remote patient monitoring and remote therapeutic monitoring as well. And that would be for patients once they're sent home. But I'll qualify that with there's a lot to learn still. Most of the remote monitoring devices require 30 days worth of monitoring. And one of the biggest gaps for this type of problem is that who owns the patient during that transfer, right? From ambulance to hospital, from hospital to home. If you send a patient home with a monitoring device, is it the hospital's responsibility or the primary care responsibility? And especially for traumatic brain injury, when you have patients, I think 40% of patients with a head injury who get readmitted to the hospital seek care at a different hospital. And so it makes it even more complicated to help bridge that gap.
That's kind of interesting, Debbie, and I know that Richard and we continue to see a lot of technologies that allow this kind of at-home care, right? So I think what you're describing is interesting and something that I didn't even know. And just speaking of challenges in general, what would be the difference though between another device that's doing some sort of at-home kind of data collecting and patient monitoring, where that information is going to the hospital, right, in real time, so that doctors and physicians and what have you can be able to monitor that and look at it and say, oh, hey, you need to get in here, right, and we need to take care of you. Like, whose responsibility is that? Is it at all relatable, I guess, to the situation that you're in?
That's a good question. Who's responsible? I think it takes you to the point that most information is siloed between hospital and even ambulance, hospital, and home. So a lot of these, I know Mayo Clinic runs a program for whether it's emergency room at home or post care at home.
Mm.
who runs that data, how is it collected, and how is it compared back to what they had at the hospital. The problem is it's not fully integrated, and we think that it's very, very important to take that hospital data from that patient and continue to monitor it in the same way it was gathered in the hospital so that it can be better translated. Meaning, if it's the same wearable or the same app that was used patient facing, that they can track themselves even while they're in the hospital, then you're better able to understand what are the differences, how are they improving, how are they at risk of getting worse. So a lot of our machine learning, and that's really the answer, is in the predictive analytics, and predicting this patient will likely have a drop in blood pressure. This patient will likely suffer more pain within 24 hours. And so we can try to help sooner.
And it seems like, I guess, with all, well, similar to all product development, it's a complex pathway, but in terms of the regulatory pathway, which path are you taking?
Yeah, so we received a small grant from the Military Technology Enterprise Consortium for the purpose of submitting our breakthrough device designation with the FDA. And breakthrough device designation is sort of a fast track method for a class 2 device, which our software and hardware combination requires. So we're following class 2 pathway. We submitted breakthrough device. As with the data we provided, it needs to be reshaped and offer more data in the emergency room, which for sure is understandable because the data we have is considered in silico, meaning it's computer retrospective data that was analyzed. And even though it was analyzed across real patients, we still need to run a study where we can take our algorithms and run them in the intended site. So yes, very complicated. Our bandage is the least complicated of the projects, and that's a class 1 510K exempt product, our understanding now. And so our hope is to manufacture that, have hospitals start to use that to pave way and give us an early revenue source to help with their R&D of the more technical pieces.
Cool. And what does the timeline look like? So you mentioned you're just a way to start some studies.
Yeah, so we have a number of collaborations with Duke Health System, Mayo Clinic, but really we're submitting a number of non-dilutive grant applications, including to the DoD. So it's very time consuming. We're trying to also raise VC funds. So time-wise, my goal would be in the next, 6 months to have an emergency room study where we can at least run algorithms through retrospective data.
I think you nailed a bunch of these milestones that we typically like to cover. Richard, those are some great questions. And Debbie, so it sounds like overall, though, you've got the FDA breakthrough designation, you're raising capital, you're in the process, or you're working towards the breakthrough designation.
Breakthrough,
Right?
yeah, I was going to correct. We do not have it. And
no, you don't have it, but you're working towards that. You're working towards raising capital. I guess what other, critical milestones over the next 6 to 18 months are you really focusing on achieving?
Yeah, so we are submitting our full non-provisional patent for the machine learning analytics that we're using. I didn't mention it before, but we have a patent pending on facial analytics along with vital signs to predict severity of a patient's pain. And that's extremely novel, and I think it will be very useful to help with health equity, so that because your pain and my pain is not the same, and even using machine learning, I don't necessarily need to compare your micro expressions of pain to the last million people who suffered pain, but rather it can create kind of a thumbprint for how your heart rate changes, how your expressions change when you're either suffering or about to suffer pain. So we're submitting that. That's one of our big milestones is to submit that. Of course, everything costs money, so we're trying to raise funds for that as well. We have 2 granted patents already, but we have to continue to submit, various, add claims and continuation in part. And so building up our patent portfolio, of course, is a continued milestone. And we are basically a virtual company right now, working with advisors and consultants, but obviously we need to have somebody in-house for the machine learning, in-house for some of the R&D, and an early sales force for the bandage.
Something that's come up recently in the news that I'm seeing a lot of is this focus on cyber security with medical devices. Is that something that would be, necessary for your technology then?
Absolutely. I mean, that's something we've discussed with the military. I had an opportunity to present in North Carolina to the Warfighter Brain Health, and the head of the program brought a general over to me to see what we're working on, and I could show him the demo of the software, and I showed him the bandage, and he offered me some insights in terms of cybersecurity and how do you not allow other people, potential aggressors, to identify who's wearing your device and capture any of the information that could show a weakness. So that's from a military perspective. Cybersecurity is, of course, a massive concern. Even in terms of medical, for HIPAA, we need to maintain HIPAA compliance, and especially using facial analytics, that's just an extra layer. And so that's one thing that we're working through with some of our collaborators, is making sure that that data, we have a management plan to make sure that it's, stored appropriately, of course, and can't get breached. Of course, for the military, we're designing this to have red, yellow, green lights, alerts on the sensor. So of course you have to have a feature where you can turn off those lights if you don't want to be detected. But, a big value for that patented alert system for us is the fact that you're essentially enabling crowdsourcing of monitoring, because it means that a family member could identify, whoa, there's something not right going on with my family member. It's blinking yellow now, it's going to red, let me call the nurse. Otherwise, maybe that could be even faster than having the nurse notice it on their monitor. And so, same way a platform like Waze works to say, hey, there's a ladder in the middle of the road, heads up, we can have a system of predicting in advance, alerting in advance. And so I think there's a lot of value for that with a more visible platform.
And this also talks to the fact that, everyone now has to become in some way a data scientist, or certainly to the degree of understanding how to apply data science to get the best out of a medical device. So who else is involved with the company in terms of the team and helping with that aspect?
Yeah, so first of all, our medical director, Mike Blivis, is an emergency room physician. He's an aerospace engineer by training, undergraduate, and has a passion for digital health, data science, and he's been a medical director for a number of wearable companies. In the 90s, he helped pioneer ultrasound technologies, point of care diagnostics. So we have him as a critical piece of our team. And then on top of that, it just so happens my neighbor is the CEO of NLP Logics, one of the fastest growing data science companies. They developed algorithms for stroke for the Mayo Clinic. They work on fighter jets. They have a strong background in the machine learning. And I sent my son to work for them as an intern. He's worked for them a number of years. And so he's my in-house, so to speak, also doing aerospace engineering now.
Very cool, very cool. And in terms of developing the team, who do you look at next? If you're thinking about growing, is there a next key hire you have in mind, or is it too early to think about that?
It's not too early. I have a number of people to help me search for those high caliber team members. I need really a chief operating officer, somebody who can really help on a day-to-day basis with strategy. I need, we do need somebody in data science in-house, so we're not relying, on students and an outside company, because that's really become the meat and potatoes of our secret sauce.
What we always like to ask our guests, with all these experiences and everything that's going on right now, obviously, I mean, you are juggling so many balls right now, and there's so much that you're working on and focused to. So, obviously, you probably have a lot of experience and insights that you can share with the audience. So, I guess what are maybe, one, two, three things, pieces of advice, and insights that you can share with the audience, that they might want to know and consider if they were ever going to even consider starting a medical device company and trying to bring an innovative technology to market?
Yeah, great question. My first piece of advice is to know that the struggle is real, and it's a scary process. Once you have the, I'll say, entrepreneurial bug in you, it's really tough to prevent what they call feature creep. And I definitely have done that, going from bandage to sensor to software. At the same time, I hold by it because I know that that's really what's needed to fill these gaps. And on one hand, a lot of people, and we're talking to big strategics, we're talking to people like 3M and Philips and GE Healthcare and the military. So I'm getting attention from these big folks, but understanding that you really can't do it by yourself. It takes a massive network. I've spent the past couple years helping build up this network. And of course, people like Richard are fantastic. Richard has introduced me to many, many people. The M2D2 program was fantastic. Prior to that, we received a Johnson & Johnson award as well. So just tenacity is the number one thing, and just you have to have thick skin and throw your name out there as many times as you can. I mean, just pitch at any event you can. I've been told in the background by one of my advisors during a pitch event, Debbie, that was one big run-on sentence, but you got to keep doing it.
Debbie, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, and Kyle, I can attest to Debbie's tenacity. I think, she's got that brilliant entrepreneurial mindset and, brings that to the table in spades. But I'm wondering, like, what motivates you? What's the big vision? Like, where would you like to see this technology in 5 years' time?
I would love to see it, obviously, in as many emergency rooms as we can. I'd like to prove that it's able to not only save lives, but improve treatment for patients. I'd like to see that it changes some policy. It's possible that the same way that, I think it will lead to drug discovery, really. Right now, there just aren't really treatments for traumatic brain injury. It might be something as simple as, if somebody thinks they're having a stroke, you're supposed to chew 2 aspirins. Well, maybe this will help lead to, if you are in a car accident and suspect this has happened, treat the patient with XYZ. So I'd like to see some changes made. I've already seen, through the military, they have now decided to redraft how traumatic brain injury is diagnosed. And what I see is that what we discovered through data science is really what they're coming up with now. So I feel very, very validated that we're on the right track, and we are moving forward.
Brilliant. And when you're mentioning drug development, I guess there's a number of companies that might be potential acquirers of this technology. If you're looking at a potential exit, is there any sort of dream names you think this would be applicable to?
Well, given that you're based in Boston, and I just became aware that Boston Scientific owns the name pain.com, the domain name. I thought, well, a big focus of our work is identifying patients with traumatic brain injury who will go on to suffer from chronic pain. So I think companies like Boston Scientific, some of the pharmaceutical companies like Bayer could be of potential interest to us, and hopefully we are to them.
Yeah, Kyle, it sounds like that could be the perfect match.
Seriously, that's fantastic, Debbie. And I guess so. How do they get in touch with you though, if anyone wants to reach out?
Best way is email or text. I just found out that my phone is going straight to voicemail, so that at least until I troubleshoot that might not be the best idea. I'm running a lot of tests on our new app, and it's taking a lot of data off my phone. So email, LinkedIn, text message, happy to connect.
Brilliant. Well, Debbie, this has been an absolute delight to have you on the show to share your mission. So thank you so much for everything you're doing and for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, another huge thank you to Debbie Kantor, CEO and founder of Hero Medical Technologies. So thank you again, everyone, for tuning in for another episode of the MedTech Impact Podcast. I'm Kyle Cruz.
And I'm Richard Meiklejohn. Until next time, keep innovating.